Hey, what's going on, Damion?
We're live. What's up, Mike?
We are live. How's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. It just makes me laugh seeing our intro. I'm like, oh, what are they going to talk about? Wait, that's us.
I love it. What's the MD show and who are these people?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
What is the MD all about? We are doctorizing money with
Yeah.
Mike and Damion.
Well, this is round 2. Last week was a dry run, and so we're gonna do this for real. So crazy times.
Yeah. Apparently, the '80s foreign policy has arrived. That's something I learned today, and we've got crazy times everywhere. Like I was picking up the news, which I tend to stay away from, and I was looking at what's going on, and people are concerned about things like inflation right now. They're dealing with interest rates. They're concerned about things, and I think it's about to be a whole lot messier. And so it's a good time for people to get more present and start asking what they can do proactively, because chasing this uncertainty, the financial tumor that's growing, is not really going to be a good play. It's going to be stage 4 for a lot of people, which is, I think, where a lot of people end up. They end up in stage 4 and they're like, what happened? Well, you know what? You ate Twinkies for 65 years. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, it's crazy. And when something like this starts happening out there, and you're the perfect person to, talk with about this, we really have to start looking at everything. I was talking about this before we got on the show with Mike, and I was reading the article this morning in the Wall Street Journal, and it was talking about Coinbase and the QR code, and how how many millions of people jumped up and just scanned that QR code. And we live in such an interesting time. I think we kind of touched on this last week. It's funny because they spent so much money on this QR code, and it worked, and it worked so well it crashed their system. But what this article was talking about this morning in the Wall Street Journal is kind of a different perspective. The day and age we live in, and we've been talking about this for a while. I think world wars are going to be fought in a different arena. We're already seeing it with cyber wars and everything else. And when something like this starts happening, like, you really have to ask yourself, I mean, obviously they want physical control over an area, but what does that lead into as we're all distracted in technology? And, the first thing I was thinking about this morning is my Bitcoin, and just thinking about getting that off. You and I talked about this forever ago. I ordered the Trezor wallet because you're like, you've got to get this stuff off. But look how easy it was for something to crash Coinbase's system. And if something like that's just one version, but if people start freaking out and everybody's trying to get their Bitcoin or transfer or sell, there's periods of time where we might not have access to this stuff. And it's super interesting.
Well, I love that you're bringing that up, because I've seen this for the last 6 years, because I started engaging with Bitcoin basically because the only way I could buy a coffee in Prague was to buy Bitcoin and then use it for coffee. In retrospect, that coffee cost me about $700, but that, who knew that was going to happen? But it's like we saw what happened in Canada with Justin Trudeau, the prime minister. We saw how he basically pushed an agenda to try to stop these protests, these peaceful protests, by blocking and seizing crypto, specifically Bitcoin and Ethereum. And they're going after it based on their ability to go to these centralized systems like Coinbase and seize it. And so what did Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong and the Kraken CEO come back and say? You should definitely take your stuff off of our exchanges. I thought that was very cool that they said, here's how you actually control it. You take it off the centralized control system, and that's how we push back on these centralized big leviathan governments and institutions. We start taking control. We take control of our stuff. And with crypto, it's very simple. There is absolutely no way. So, like, something that happened, and I don't know if we talked about this before, but IRA Financial got hacked and lost $34 million worth of Bitcoin and Ethereum on behalf of their customers because they didn't have a secure thing, even though they claimed to. And that's the problem with any of these institutions, whether it's a bank, because we have bail-ins where they're just, these banks in these countries are taking money and saying, oh, you're now going to be an equity owner of a bank. And so you're like, wait, I guess I didn't have control. What does that mean? And that's happening with crypto. It's happening. We have to start thinking about these things. And it's not enough to say, well, it'll all work out. Like, I'm pretty sure that there was a whole bunch of people in Nazi Germany that said it'll all work out if we just be quiet. Didn't work out very well. So we've got to be mindful that there is a path that we're going down, and you can be smart about your assets. You can be smart about your control, or you can be Pollyanna. And I don't think Pollyanna is necessarily a really good strategy.
Yeah, I think we lost your audio there for a second. Oh, I got it back. We're good. So quick quick question. I'm actually looking at two screens. Sorry about that. On thinking about inflation for a second, and I wanted to just interject and get your thoughts on this. So when we have a situation like this and we look back to, World War II and all this stuff, I mean, with the inflation and all the issues that we've been seeing lately, when something like this happens, and obviously we're not sucked in yet, there's a bunch of, conversation happening around it and everything else. But have you ever looked at how much money is actually printed during a time of war?
That's normally when all the money is printed. I don't know the numbers.
Yeah,
Have you
it's insane, and I mean, there's some conflicting reports around it, but when you look at inflation and the way it's been and the way that money printing has gone on, I just wonder sometimes too, like the timing of all this, and not to get too, crazy about it, but when we go through a period of time where, everything that was happening, you and I were talking about this a month ago. It's weird because the COVID, I don't know, things kind of started loosening up. And, when Britain first came out and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna open up. The first thing that you said a month ago when we were talking about this was like, what else is going on now? Because the conversation started changing, and it makes you wonder. You see COVID, you see inflation, you see money printing, and then all of a sudden you see things starting to change, and then we start talking about increasing interest rates and all this other stuff, and then all of a sudden something like this happens. And I'm not saying that it's because of that, but when you look at the amount of money that's printed during times like this, it's insane. And so I just sometimes wonder if it's just another excuse.
I think there's a lot of things that are excuses to print money because that system needs to print money like central banks and these systems have to keep creating more because their system only works on growth. It's kind of like how I mean our entire system with GDP. The reason that we always have to be talking about growth and the economy is growing because if it contracts, then our system spirals and it spirals faster down, and that's why Ben Bernanke was such a student of the depression. He said the worst case scenario is a depressionary environment where things spiral because they spiral super fast. So they're always looking for a reason to justify monetizing debt, spending money, printing, and they're doing it. And so yeah, are we focusing on something? We're all tuned into Ukraine? I mean we're starting to see stuff in Taiwan with China pushing because hey, what better time to go after Taiwan and assert ourselves at least as the Chinese government in that region than the time when the US is distracted and the whole world is focused on Ukraine. It's a perfect time to go do these things. And what do those all lead to? Well, we need to have more military. We need to have more programs to protect people because inflation has gone up. Oil is at $100 a barrel now, and that's likely to continue to increase. I mean, Russia, did you know that Russia is the third biggest producer of oil in the world?
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? If they're being basically sanctioned to death, they're gonna be selling their oil directly to somebody else. It's not gonna be anybody that's sanctioning them. At least that's the theory. And so what's gonna have to happen if we have 150, $200 a barrel oil, which is very realistic. That could very realistically happen. We end up in a live fire shooting war that expands, and it very well could. Because do you think Putin just wants Ukraine? No, the guy's been talking about USSR, like how that was such a stupid mistake that it should have never been broken apart. So we could easily see that. Well, what happens when you have inflation? Then people start saying, I'm hungry. I can't afford my medication. I can't afford my food. I can't afford. So then they say, well, we'll print. We'll save you, just like they did in COVID. And so when it comes back to it, what does it all come back to? It comes back to the central banks. And so that we can yell about it. We can protest. For most people, might make you feel better for a minute between being pissed off. The question is, what do you do with it? And how do you expand? How do you grow? How do you protect your family? And I think that's what most people should be thinking about right now, because being pissed off and saying we need to get them, like, or whatever, the next boogeyman, like that isn't going to be the thing that matters the most, because these things keep cycling. There's always a boogeyman. It's always a villain. It's always something to focus on. It's this nasty. We can never have perpetual peace because there's too many profit centers for all these things that make boogeymen really, really profitable.
Yeah, and I loved what you were talking about when you were saying, the things that we should be thinking about with family. And it was just 2 weeks ago, here in Texas, there was a winter storm warning, and I think you and I discussed this a little bit, but I was kind of like mesmerized by the weakness of the supply chain and all of that stuff. Karen and I just moved here. I don't know, it's probably been 6 months. Where we grew up was in northeastern Nevada. And I mean, we grew up around snow and ice, and there's 10, 15 days a year that are below zero. And all of a sudden we see this winter storm warning coming, and it's going to get below 30 and, maybe down into the 20s. everybody was freaking out. And I understand because like last year we weren't here when it happened, but there was this crazy storm and I guess it shut everything down for weeks because they didn't have the infrastructure. That's why everybody was freaking out. But when I look at this, literally the stores were empty, Damion. One day, the fact that a winter storm is coming, like the entire stores were empty and everything else. And when you look at this stuff, it just makes me realize, you know, you and I are kind of obviously even longer before COVID talking about, you know, being prepared and not just prepared with food, not just prepared with like, you know, ammunition and things that you need to survive, but just being prepared emotionally, mentally, wargaming this stuff out. And it's interesting to me seeing how fragile in an area like just Austin, Texas, that when a winter storm comes, that literally, if you didn't get to the store, like you could be without food for a week or 2 weeks if that storm had continued on. It was a 1 day storm, fortunately, but when we went to the store the next 2 days, nobody worked the next day at the store. And the third day, when I went to the grocery store, they didn't have bread. There was so many things that they were out of for 3 days. And you just look at times like this are really times for us to test our theories and systems. And so bringing it back to Bitcoin, inflation, even retirement, look at how many people's retirement accounts are just getting blasted today. And so these are something has been coming and we knew it. And whether it's this trigger or whether it's something that continues, like these are periods of time where we just need to test our thinking and our philosophies around things.
Playing it out and testing it right now is the most important thing, because eventually we're going to be in a live, it's like the thinking through war games in Ukraine and these places. You can think through it now, they're in the middle of it. You can't theorize about it now. It's live, and and we talked about this a couple of years ago when the pandemic first started, and thinking about, do we have enough resources and supplies and everything. The reality is a storm can happen, and it can be a financial storm, it could be a rainstorm. They just canceled basically everything into Dallas today because there's some freezing rain. We know freezing rain is going to happen in Dallas every bloody year. So, like, how do you plan for that? What do you do? Well, maybe one of the things you do is you say, okay, in February, I'm not flying through Dallas because there is a decent chance that they're just going to cancel and disrupt and everything. And so, yeah, if you think about these things, it's kind of like training, whether it's learning how to shoot a weapon, or whether, like in my case, spending decades in martial arts. I don't think about that stuff. I've gamed it out because of all the training. And there's a saying that you're not going to rise to the occasion. If there's something happens and there's no bread, you're not going to say, "Oh, no problem, I'll become a baker today." No, you're going to fall down to the level of your training and what you're able to actually do because you've already done it. You don't think, if somebody comes and attacks me and there's a mob coming after me, I'm naturally going to move because I spent 20 years training. I'm not thinking, what do I do? Most people are thinking, how am I going to block a punch? Meanwhile, they get punched in the face.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the times where we have time that we need to be spending it. But most people, unfortunately, are too busy either chasing something or they're just soft. And we've developed a nation of, sadly, soft snowflakes. It's the triple S disaster.
Sadly, soft snowflakes. I love it. Quick question on it's been a while since anybody was really, you know, excited or talking about gold and silver. I mean, obviously you continue and we continue to have the conversation around it because I think it's a long-term asset that I don't think is going anywhere. But why do you think that, I mean, I think the question's obvious or the answer is obvious, like why gold and silver are rallying, but Bitcoin, like what Bitcoin's doing, what do you think? Is there no correlation to this?
So the gold and silver has been dormant because there's been other exciting places where people are in a boom market. You've got the stock market, you've got things that are new and exciting and shiny, and tech stocks do really well, and things that Bitcoin has done well because it's new and it's got a relatively small market capitalization. It's $750 billion. That's relatively small for an entire asset class. I mean, gold and silver is 10 trillion. So it's a little blip. So gold and silver is becoming it always ends up doing this when you have a geopolitical instability, when you have war. And part of that is because sovereign states and wealth funds and things have assets. Russia has the Federation of Russia has $600 billion worth of their foreign reserves are foreign currencies and gold. And guaranteed that a lot of that, there's a ton of gold. China has the same thing. And what happens is you have a rush to gold and you have a rush to dollars. And because all the currencies are fiat, but the dollar is the least bad. I mean, it's because it's the petrodollar, it's the pharma dollar, everything has been running through it, but that may actually change Because when you look at Russia being knocked out of SWIFT, which is the international settlement system, and you have Russia potentially getting sanctioned, they're just going to say, okay, well, what else are we going to do? We're the third biggest producer of oil, so we start doing things direct. And are they going to use, Anthony Pompliano talked about this, are they going to use the renminbi for in China or the ruble in Russia as a global standard? I don't think people trust them. They're also the same. They're fiat. So could there be a shift towards Bitcoin? Yeah, potentially. Right now, it's a fear trade, and that's why you see gold and silver moving the way that they're moving. And Bitcoin is one of those things where a lot of people were in it, and you're having people shake out, and that's because most people are speculating. And I saw a great number on this, that if you're into something for less than 4 years, you're a speculator. And I was like, wow, that's almost everybody that's involved in crypto. And people get freaked out, and it's the people that are holding, that are hodlers, holding on for dear lifers. They're not thinking about 4 years. They're thinking about this being the play for the next decade or the next 20 years.
Yeah. What's your what's your $1 million I had somebody text me this morning and they're like, are you buying Bitcoin right now? And Karen and I were talking about this too, because you say, I love gold and silver. But it doesn't, just because it goes up and down doesn't mean I'm necessarily buying and selling. But what do you think about Bitcoin? You buying right now?
Yeah, for sure. There, one of the rules I heard from a buddy of ours is that anytime there's a 30% drop, it's buy time. And we've had a 30% drop. I mean, in the last 24 hours, Bitcoin is down 10 and Ethereum's down 15. And I mean, to me, it's on sale. And when you think about where things are going and the adoption, I mean, Fidelity has an engagement with Nexo. So Fidelity is the big boy and in the financial services, like they've got 2, 3, 4 trillion dollars, like the massive amount. BlackRock, Blackstone, all these major institutions are building trading desks. These institutions don't do what they do. They don't do these things accidentally. They do them on purpose because they see where things are going, and they're investing billions of dollars in all this stuff. So, yeah, is it time to buy? Of course, because there's just more and more adoption. There's more, and there's a network effect. The more people are involved, especially the more institutions that are involved, and that also tells me that it's safe from governments, because enough institutions and financial institutions are the ones that drive policy. That's what happened in Canada when Justin Trudeau backed off and said, "Oh, I guess we're going to seize, or we're going to stop the Emergency Powers Act." That happened because there was a whole bunch of pushback from people that didn't think they'd get elected, and there was a pushback by the financial institutions. So if you start looking at the drivers of things, you start understanding, okay, if the financial institutions are getting in bed with something, it's pretty likely that that something is a certainty. I mean, they're not spending tens and potentially hundreds of billions of dollars investing in something so they can make 5%. They're doing it because they want to dominate, and they see where they see where the puck is going.
You were just talking about Trudeau in Canada, and when you see everything that just recently happened up there, even the bank accounts being frozen, and you look at what the GoFundMe, what was that, like $9 million or something, that they basically GoFundMe turned over because it was, anyway, when you look at all of that, I'm curious, all I think about is Bitcoin. When you think about banks being seized, and you think about, the way that these governments are acting, as you're saying, and you know what, forget about whether it's right or wrong, or, what your opinion is on it. Just the fact that the government can come in without any due process or anything else and just seize an entire, group of people's bank account just because they want to, like, that's a very scary place. And when you think about everything that's going on, and then you look at Bitcoin and it being cheap right now, not because necessarily is it a good investment, is it a bad investment, but is it a viable long-term, means to transact that everybody's going to be looking for? And that's the thing that gets me, like, it just starts to make more and more sense. It's like it's truly the people's money.
Yeah, and apparently certain countries are smart enough to get in bed early, like El Salvador. Uh, the president down there. It's really interesting watching his commentary on Twitter. If you want to know what's going on geopolitically with Bitcoin, that's somebody to follow. And it's fascinating to watch the control that's easily used and abused. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky talked about this, and he said in the last couple of days, he said the U.S. has similar powers. We can do the same thing. The president can do the same thing. So we have Sleepy Joe up there potentially doing who knows what, and not even knowing what he's doing because he's half asleep. And And that's incredible power to be able to seize things. You cannot seize. So anytime people go, well, what about the hacking risk? There is no hacking risk on the blockchain. Let's just be really, really clear. So everybody, if you don't know a whole lot about crypto or blockchain, there is no way to hack a Bitcoin if you have a wallet in your hand and your own security key, your secret key. The way it gets hacked is you've got an exchange like Mt. Gox or like IRA Financial or something. You've got one of these places where you've got the ability for coders, and that's actually what you mentioned it in the beginning.
Mhm.
This war over in Ukraine, what was the first thing that Russia did? They went in and used their hackers. What has Russia been doing for years? Building up massive hacking operations. Same with China. My the conversations I've had with people in DC that are behind the curtain, we are way behind in terms of our ability to fend off cyber warfare. And China and Russia have been developing these massive armies of digital soldiers for years. And so that's the first thing they went after in Ukraine's infrastructure using hacking. So are we next? It's already happening. And the question is, how much worse could it be? Because we're basically asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, and you alluded to this a little bit ago too, but just being ready, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the food and everything else, because that's where our mind automatically goes is all of that. But when we start thinking about, the monetary system and where is your retirement and where is your capital placed, and it's so funny to me that people will spend so much time saying, yeah, but they can hack it and yeah, they can steal your Bitcoin. But what makes us think that it's any better at Chase or, like you said, the IRA companies or this is what I was talking about with the QR code, Coinbase for that matter. I had, as we were talking with the Trezor wallet, I had told Tim last week, I'm like, figure out how to get this stuff off of Coinbase for me, and so he went through the process and figured it all out, and we're going to get everything moved off. But the reality is, we shouldn't trust anybody's platform. And that's what the point that you drove home. It's just funny to me that certain people will be like, oh, well, I can trust, having $1 million in my Chase bank account. Like nobody's potentially possibly going to hack that. But yet I don't trust Bitcoin not being hacked. It's the same infrastructure. It's the same system, really, if it's all just out there.
Well, and the fiat system, the banks and things, people who think that they have their money there and it's safe, it's not safe. Like even if it doesn't get hacked, there's this thing called the government. There's a thing called bail-ins. There's all sorts of things, and it's called counterparty risk because I love the saying that American Precious Metals Exchange has, and it's if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Like I
Mhm.
love that saying. Like truly, if you're not holding your cash, and even if you're holding cash, what does that mean? You're holding an IOU that's based on taxability of the government. So, what are you actually holding? When you hold gold and silver, or you hold crypto in your hand in a cold wallet that's tied to the blockchain, there is no counterparty risk. Like with crypto, it's math. I will trust math over people any day of the week because there's no emotion. And it's like Andrew Yang, forget about his politics, but he kept saying, he had the little pin that said math, make America think again. I think that
Mhm.
or make America think something and it was really interesting to start thinking about that because we've lost it's about emotions and
Mhm.
people are chasing their emotions and it's how we feel good. And whenever you have a society that shifts towards just being emotional and they stop thinking, we have a huge problem because at our basic core, we're animals. And when animals get emotional, they get fiery, they want to go to fight, they want to go to, procreate. Like there is no thinking. You just think about that. When you get pissed at somebody or you want to go hook up, you are literally not thinking. And so therein lies the danger. We got to start thinking again.
I love that. Make America think. I wonder what the H stands for. It's so good. So when we're talking about Bitcoin, what do you think? And again, just back to banking versus Bitcoin and people being concerned about hacking in the ledgers and everything else. I heard somebody say it's been a couple years now, but a bank is basically just a complex ledger, right? The only thing is it's not decentralized. And it's just so funny to me again that people are like, we get so comfortable with our current system, whether it's the 401ks, whether it's the Fidelities of the world, whether it's the banks again. Yes, anything that's new. And you kind of brought it into perspective when you said that, anybody that's only into something for 4 years is really just a speculator. It's so new. And I remember asking the question, like, what is it? Like, what is it? And but we don't ask that question about a bank. What is it? Like, but it's the same. It's a complicated Excel sheet at a bank. Like I put money in, I took money out, and we trust their ledger, yet we have all these questions about a decentralized ledger because we don't understand it.
Oh, and the funny part is when I hear I've heard this for years. People will say things like, well, Bitcoin, it's risky, uh, and I laugh and they go, it's not based on anything, and I go, wait. Actually, it is. It's based on energy. It requires Bitcoin is unique in that. That's why there's such big fans of Bitcoin. That's why it's the biggest. It's proof of work, and it actually something has to happen. Energy. So when I describe Bitcoin, it's a store of energy, and so everything is energy. The problem with our monetary system and the fiat currency is you can print or make it up, and so you can make up $4 trillion. There was no energy that was required for that. And so basically what that means is how do you do that? You steal from people from their previous efforts and their prosperity. And so people go, wait, I thought the dollar was based on something. It's not based on anything. It used to be based on gold. Now it's not based on anything. So it's this fiat, and whereas you actually have Bitcoin based on something. But this is the institutions. This is the central bank and the politicians trying to convince us that we should stick with the old system. Why? Because the old system benefits them. It's a legacy system empowering them to do what they want and to become more powerful and wealthier. Meanwhile, it's stealing from everybody else. And that's the great switch with crypto, especially Bitcoin, because you can't just make up Bitcoin. Like you actually have to earn it. It has to be done with an exchange of value with energy. It's actually honest. And for the first time since gold, we literally have an honest system. I mean, even when we had fractional reserve lending, where gold was, dollars were backed by gold, but then they were lent out at 10 times the amount of gold. That wasn't even that honest. That was manipulated. Whereas with crypto, especially Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin, it's honest. I mean, who doesn't want more honest? You know, uh, we want honest money.
Yeah. What do you think when we think about this? I saw something today about a quicker push, and they were whoever was talking about this was talking about directly tied to Ukraine and movement of money, and they think there's going to be an even faster push to develop the Fed coin. Why do you think that correlates?
I think that there's a realization that things can be manipulated and frozen, and so the more people that get nervous about that, the more they start asking questions like, "What are my alternatives?" And so they start going in a different direction, which is called crypto. It's called decentralized. And so you've got like China's already got their China coin that's already live. And the problem is not that it's see people think that these things are great because they're easy, and we've already got digital money. It's called Visa. It's called
Yeah,
it's wire transfers. It's all made up. It's in the air.
it's a
But it's what?
it's just a ledger.
It's just a ledger. The the thing though is as soon as you have a centralized coin, you have absolute surveillance. Everything is known, and you can manipulate what people can do with it. You can expire their money. You can charge people different rates based on if you're going to loan money, whether they even can borrow. So centralized, it'll be interesting to see if there's enough pushback from Congress with the Fed, because there was, I think it was Emmers that pushed back. Congressman said, no, I'm going to push back on this, the Fed having a coin that is, that just, they can't just make up a coin, because it would give them literal tyrannical control. And that's what they want. I mean, they've had it in a different form. This is just a next level. So when you think about absolute control and the ability, because there wouldn't be a need for commercial banks. Once you've got a Fed coin,
Mm.
I mean, the Chases of the world are not necessary anymore, because we all have a direct Fed account. That's pretty powerful if you're the Fed.
Kenny, as you're saying that, I'm thinking something that Kenny McElroy said. I don't know, it's been 4 or 5 years, like, and I think he was maybe a little early on the prediction, but he said, in the next 5 to 10 years, like all these physical banks, these brick and mortar banks are going to be closed. And when he said that, I was like, it started making so much sense too, even to like, who goes to the bank? Like, why do we need the bank? And then as we get further and further into this digitized currency, like there's so many things that are going to get disrupted. Forget the real estate side of that conversation for a minute, but um, it's so interesting because I think COVID accelerated a lot of the stuff that was already coming. But it's just interesting as you're saying that, like just thinking about the need for Chase goes away, like literally.
Maybe that's why they're entering the metaverse right now. For some damn reason, they think people want to go hang out at the bank in the metaverse. I was like, what in the why? Why would anybody in their right mind want to go hang out with you guys? Like your presence is just creepy. You're like the weird uncle that never like opens his curtains, that lives down the street, like really strange. So there, yeah, it did accelerate things, and I disrupted or deleted. Like you think about the value that a bank plays when you've got DAOs, these decentralized autonomous organizations that can create things, like they can create wealth to do things. a DAO was created out of thin air to put basically put people together to buy a copy of the Constitution that Ken Griffin ended up buying. Yep, and they raised like $40 million in a heartbeat. Didn't take very long. So you've got things like that that are going to start creating value. And what you have is you have institutions that are trying to push back to block that from happening. But how do you block the network? It doesn't work. Like there's powers that the US government has to turn off the internet, but all they can do is turn off the nodes. Can they turn off satellites? No, because there's satellites that are autonomous, that aren't governed by a nation state. And so as we think through and you as you said, war game it, that there's gamifying. You're just thinking through what are all the different scenarios. I'd rather be on the side of decentralized control where the network controls things based on independent decisions versus a centralized command structure. And there is a fight between liberty and tyranny. Like there's no doubt decentralized and centralized. They are running into each other right now. And on the side of centralized, you have China and you have Russia, you have their strongmen that are running things. And on the decentralized space, it's really fascinating because you have the president of El Salvador, who is a strong man. He's pretty aggressive, and yet what did they do? They embraced Bitcoin. So I think you're seeing a shift in there, and it's no longer going to be left and right. It's going to be freedom or tyranny. And guys like Justin Trudeau, who this smashing young man that people think was like JFK. I mean, he's more of a centralized control, warmonger kind of guy, instead of places that embrace decentralized and they're actually saying we believe and trust in the people. That's going to be the difference, I think, going forward.
I'm curious to your thoughts on energy. And I don't remember where we heard this, but Karen and I were talking about this the other day, and somebody was mentioning that it takes an entire nuclear power plant, the energy created from a nuclear power plant, to power just the World of Warcraft. The amount of people that are playing World of Warcraft, the amount of energy that's taken from that game, it takes an entire nuclear power plant. And so when we start thinking about this, I heard somebody say the other day, you might even know who it was, talking about how, there's a period of time where in the near future where 50% of all energy consumption, and you said this earlier about money and Bitcoin and all of that, it's just energy. And everybody's freaking out about, dirty energy and power and how much power it takes and everything else. But the reality is, and again, we don't compared to what, how much energy does it take, to print dollar bills and to move dollar bills around and run banks and have physical brick and mortar buildings and how much heat goes on in these buildings. And so again, compared to what, but I'm just curious about, your thoughts around the energy side of this and how that plays into Bitcoin.
Well, here's an example that's I think is awesome because Bitcoin is very green. People are like, "What? No, it chews up a lot of energy and it's a big waste." And there's all these places that are just processing things. Intel just announced that they're building a Bitcoin machine that's going to be 10 times more efficient. So you've got things like that happening, innovation, because basically the Bitmain or whatever the company was that was creating all the different computers has basically been the same technology for the last 12 years. So that needed to change. Here's the green part. And you have oil companies that are now saying, hey, we've got flares. We've got all of our natural gas that's being just shot out or burned off. And they're starting to realize, and people are doing this where they're mining Bitcoin using these flares. And what's happening is they're actually reducing the emissions into the air. So all the methane that's going out is not going to be going out like it is. It's being pushed into these generators. And that's what's being used to mine the Bitcoin. So it's actually pro environment when you start doing things like that. And that was the market. So people that say the government knows best, they haven't paid attention to anything, and they're following some AOC line of thinking. The reality is the market is solving the problem. And this is a great example where it's actually making the environment cleaner by mining Bitcoin. So take that, Greenpeace.
Take that. I love it. Crazy. So I want to shift gears a little bit. You and I were talking yesterday. I think it was yesterday. We had a pretty in-depth conversation about, like what really matters. And I woke up this morning, just thinking about, again, even the situation in Ukraine. And there's a person that I know, I don't personally know him, but they were on Facebook and they were talking about how they grew up in Iran and they remember being a 7-year-old and Iraq was bombing Iran. And he remembers, in the middle of the nights, the bombing sirens would go off and his dad would come grab everybody and they'd go down into the basement and how terrifying that was. And I'm just like, when you have things like this, you wake up and you just realize, you were talking earlier about being prepared and making sure that, you're ready with the family and everything else. And then you see things like this go on in the world. And we just realize, like, number one, how fortunate we are. And number two, how small we really actually are. But then number three, and just back to what you said earlier, like how much really actually doesn't matter in the big picture. And, just being prepared and, what we're working on a daily basis. And when things are really, really good, we have years of plenty. We're just out grinding and we think we're going down a certain road. And what I love about having conversations with you, and we get to have so many of them, is it always just brings me back to like center, like what really matters. And you start thinking about, I mean, even the Bitcoin conversation, the reason why we're even having it is because it really matters. It matters long term, like not having the government control your money and having your future retirement in your own hands, et cetera. So I'm just curious, like, based on our conversation yesterday and everything that's going on, like what really matters?
I think that it's when you think about the people that had something that mattered a week ago and now they're dead in Ukraine, and it wasn't because they just got old and died of something. They literally got blown up by Vladimir Putin. Like things happen, and and it's a not so gentle reminder that we don't have an unlimited amount of time. And when we're focused on grinding, I get it. There's seasons for grinding. The question is, why are you grinding? And if you go, well, it's because I want X, and the reality is most of X won't make you happy. There's a certain point, and I think there's a study that after $70,000 in income, most people have a diminishing return on their happiness. And so we go, okay, well, I want 70, I want 150. Okay, so you go to 150, then is 300 going to make you twice as happy as 150? The likelihood is it's going to make you less happy because it's more complicated.
Mhm.
And I'm in all in favor of wealth. What I'm not in favor of is transferring your life for more money. And if like when I think about 15 years ago, when I was focused, the goal was more money. And why? Because of more money, because I had this idea that more money made me more valuable and more significant. It was helping me with my human needs. And now, after having lost that big pile in 2008, there's a different thinking. And the thinking is that more people matter. And it's not that just one person isn't enough. It's that I think our potential is, if we have potential for more impact externally, not just on our own hedonistic tendencies, which I was really good at. I don't think you've been good at hedonistic tendencies. I think I get the gold medal there, but maybe I'm wrong. I that to say I'm going to do more, like people that get really obsessed with a mission because it's about other people, that to me is a very healthy drive. And even if it kills you, your life mattered.
Mhm.
And I think unfortunately most people are grinding and it's killing them. Like you and I have talked about the struggle, and sometimes we have all these opportunities to go work on our health, and we go, well, here's the easy one: eat better, drink less, work out more.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very simple. Instead, we go work ourselves into a tizzy to create more money. And so why are we doing that? Most people are trained to do that because growth is key, and if you're not going, you're dying. Like I've said that a million times.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean going and making more money is how you're growing. And that's one of the things that people really need to think about: is more money the key? Because you can go make a bunch of money. Like there's lots of ways to make money. Become a drug dealer. You can have your 401k accidentally go up and you're like, oh, I'm richer and I'm smarter and I'm wealthier and life's better. And then you're afraid of losing it because you have no skills. So you didn't really grow. You just sort of accidentally ended up in a place. And a lot of times people end up there. They just accidentally end up somewhere, and then they're playing defense. How do I not lose? And
Mhm.
there's that's not really that much fun at all.
It's such a good point. I was thinking as you were saying that, like what Tom Wheelwright always says, what's the best way to make more money? Keep what you've already made. And so many times, we're moving on to the next thing. We're, trying to get the next best investment and all this stuff. And in reality, like sometimes just slowing down and dealing with what's like right in front of us is probably the most important thing. And it's just so easy to get caught up, especially in the world that we live in, where everybody's, yeah, it's getting harder and harder. And I'm not trying to make excuses, but when you think about the fact that 50 years ago, we didn't really get to see, other than, keeping up with the Joneses used to be your neighbor. Like you would just see your neighbor. Now we get to see the entire world. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think you could use that for good, and in being able to get inspired, and, what's the potential, what's the opportunity. But keeping up with the Joneses is front and center with us constantly, nonstop, when it comes to social media. And even this, like you and I have had this conversation, the people that are doing well in life on social media or in life in general, business, whatever, they're not consuming. We're all consumers to some degree, but even on social media, the thing about it is to show up, be a creator. That translates into investment. That translates into the real estate world. That translates into the business world. We've got to learn to be less consumers and more creators. And when you're talking about, it's really easy to get the shiny object syndrome. We were talking about this yesterday because we're surrounded by so many amazing people that are doing such amazing things. And every single day I'm like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. If he could do it, I can do it. And it's so hard to stay focused. And just back to Tom Wheelwright's statement, like the best way to make more money is to keep what you already have or double down on what you have or spend more time. Karen and I were just talking about this. You were talking about it in the form of health, but even money meetings, like the best couples in the world that are doing well financially have money meetings, or you have board meetings with your family and your children. Or when you're talking about health, we were laughing about this yesterday, but in the Go Abundance Champions group, Dr. Sinclair came in and, was teaching us all these amazing things about living to 120 and all these things that you could do. And that's when the conversation came up. It's like, well, before I go spend 50 grand on, living to 120, I might as well go to the gym every day. Right. I think we think it's so much more complicated as Americans, maybe as people living in this day and age period. Maybe it's not an American problem, but we're looking for the easy button, and there's no easy button. It's hard, and we got to focus.
This may be, well, here's one of the interesting things. If you think big picture, it's an American problem that's being spread, and it's like, this is America's COVID, meaning this is America's virus. And I say that this is the consumption virus because we have an unlimited, indefinite amount of want and desire for other things. Like how many iPhones have you had? Like, I've had almost every one of them. Why? Because I need the next thing. Yeah. And a few minutes ago, you said, and then it's about what's next. And I was thinking, I was laughing in my head. There was a woman that I went on a couple of dates with, and I remember her saying that, what's next, constantly. And in my brain, I went, what do you mean what's next? Like what's after me? Like what? Like, this is really weird. It's always about what was next. It was never about what was now. And so there's two things that we have to think about. So we want to be present and actually be wherever we are. And we also want to be future focused and about creating something, having a North Star to pull us, to drive us, to inspire us. And it's, if you're just thinking about what's next, you like wake up one day, it's like Click, the movie with Adam Sandler. You wake up one day and you're dead. Except that doesn't make any sense, because if you wake up, you're dead. But you wake up and then you die. So like we miss the whole experience. And so what are we even doing if it's just about what's next? And that's where all the juice is, and what's now. Mm-hmm. But it's not about the consumption. And to what you were saying about, we've become a nation and a world of consumers, and we're voyeurs. We're watching, and hey guys, thanks for watching on Instagram and wherever you guys are. Appreciate that. But the truth is, if that's all we do, what's the purpose? Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the problems. We don't have purpose. When you're a creator, you do have purpose, because you're building something, and we're meant to do that. Like, you look at nature, it's like kids and nature don't lie. And animals are part of nature. What is nature doing? It's always growing. It's expanding. It's whether it's trees or it's a beaver. There's always something. There's a creation. There's something. And I think we need to get more tuned in to the natural rhythms, and instead of becoming just reactionary to marketing. And that's unfortunately what I think a lot of people are in. They're reacting to media. They're reacting to the Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue marketing. We're chasing, like we talked about yesterday. We talked about how we are comparing ourselves, and there's a danger potentially with comparing. And it's easy on Facebook. It's easy on social to go, I am so inadequate. And we're in a group where there's a lot of guys that have very large net worths into the tens of millions of dollars. And all of a sudden you start feeling really small. You're like, man, I'm only a multimillionaire. I'm an idiot. Like, it's sort of debilitating if you go in and you have to just have you have to really go in with a different mindset of maybe connection and contributing. Because if you're going in there trying to figure out how you're going to be somebody else, you are screwed.
I was reading an article yesterday in the Atlantic. I think it was called The Key to Happy or something like that. And it was talking about Mick Jagger in the song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And, it went on to talk about this, and this is kind of what like triggered this whole thought process in my brain yesterday because yeah, speaking of ADHD, like I read this today that I think 90% of entrepreneurs, there was some study done that they feel like they have a version of ADHD. And it's because like that's part of the visionary process. That's part of the creation process. And it's also really hard. There's three different energies, and my coach talks about all this, all the time. There's a creation energy, and then there's a completion energy, and then there's just a stabilization energy in the center, right? And so many of us have different versions of this. Some of us are really good at, creating and starting. And that's me. Like as a visionary, I'm really good at like starting, but it can also create a version of unhappiness because like I, it's hard to not move on to the next thing. And when I was reading that article yesterday about really the key to happiness, and you've said this so many times, it's being present. It's dealing with what's like right in front of us right now. And I'm just so grateful, even, what we were talking about with everything that's going on in the world and all of that, just slowing down. I think it's so important because just like Mick Jagger said, it's hard to get that satisfaction. But the reality is if we're not grateful with what we have now, and if we're not present, and also just, tying back to what you said earlier, like, what does your family really need? Like, what is, sometimes spell that out, because we can just get to get to get, and it's really just about getting more and more and more, when in reality, it's about being present and slowing down in the relationships. And, how many times Kara said this the other day to, in our couples mastermind group, 10 years ago, we were praying for what we have today. And then today we're praying for what we won't have tomorrow. And it's like just slowing down and being a little bit grateful. I think that's just kind of like what the theme was with us yesterday.
It is kind of wild when you think about that. It's great point. The billionaires 100 years ago don't have what the poverty stricken have today. The tools, when you think about in America, if you're thinking about, if we're just talking about that, because I've been places in Africa and in Asia and Fiji and places where I've seen people that were incredibly happy and literally had the clothes that they were wearing and the coconut they just pulled out of a tree. And they were happier than most people I ever meet in America. So it's kind of fascinating. But the truth is, it's not going to matter what we get. The new technology on the new vehicle, if you think that that's going to make you happy, I just got a car a couple weeks ago, and it's funny because I even noticed today I was looking at other cars. And I'm like, wow, really? It's a brand new ass car, and it's a nice freaking car.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at something else, and I'm thinking, is that all it was? It was a week, and I'm already bored. Wow, what is going on? And we're programmed and wired that way. And so I'm thinking right now that a different intention would be to go and look and say, okay, this is amazing. I get to go take this thing for a ride, doing something different instead of, I mean, we look at our phones, we look at the internet, and there's something shinier, sexier, whatever on there all the time. I mean, this is going to lead to a bunch of eunuchs at some point because you have shinier, sexier other people on there. And there's a whole generation of people that are like sexless, as a really crazy example, where they're just not having sex. And they're like, nah, it's not even worth it. I'm just going to be by myself and I'm going to hang out with porn or shiny objects or whatever it is, or maybe both at the same time. And I mean, that's kind of a weird thing for our species. But you think about it, it's satisfying the need, and it avoids the consequence of rejection or these other things that are part of interacting with human beings. So we if we're not conscious, if we're just thinking about the next thing, we're in deep trouble. There is power in presence, and in the martial arts world, the times you're not present are the times that you're bleeding on the mat. You're like, oh, and the deeper present you go, the more power you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing with anything. I see a lot of people how they invest. They're not present to anything. All they're thinking about is, oh, if I throw money at this thing, I don't have to think. I just have to show up in 10 years and it'll be worth a whole lot of money. There's no presence there. There's just this greed, and there's this disconnect from having to do any work. And if you're present and you're willing to do work, you can create anything. I really truly believe that's the case with money or relationships. Or I always laugh at people that think that they can not be present with a spouse or somebody, and they think that's going to stay. It's like it's going to stick. Like, who wants to be in bed with somebody that's not there?
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is the worst experience of my life. Where are you? Like, you ever been with, like, I know you and Kara, this has never happened. I like, I just think about that and people, I'm like, what where are you? You're not here. You're not. And it's the most disconnected, just insulting thing ever. And your money has feelings.
Mm,
And capital goes where it's respected. And if you don't respect it, it'll go away. It's the same thing with people. And so when you start thinking about people and money the same way, like you can't just say, I'm going to passively not think about whatever. It's the
mhm.
same thing I say about sex. You can't have passive sex and think your partner is going to stick around. They are gone.
Yeah.
Same with your money.
You know, I want to tie this into, I kind of want to just honor you for what you've built with EQRP and the community and the education, um, because of that reason. And in fairness to all of us, I'm not trying to make excuses here, but I think it's basic human nature, right? To want the next thing. And if you even go back to survival, like if you could kill two buffalo because you don't know when you're going to be able to kill another one, right? So when we think about basic human nature, it makes sense. But we just live in such a day and age, which actually is probably the greatest time ever to live. Um, so we're blessed on that front, but then we're also bombarded left and right. I mean, these companies are very, very smart. They're hitting us left and right, you know, the vehicle companies or whatever it is. Like our brains are so overstimulated, as you said, that we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace, but also understanding it is so important. And so again, mirroring back, that's what I love about when you just even look at the schooling system, like, you know, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a job, work till you're 65, 70, you know, give us your retirement account, right? Which is just the banker's way and the government's way of getting rich and holding on to your money forever. That's another programming. And that's what I love about what you've built with the EQRP and your company and your community. It's all about education. And so when you were talking about, you know, money has feelings. And we were discussing this a couple of days ago because we're trained to turn our money over to someone else and let them take care of it for us because that's easy. It's truly the easy button. But it's funny to me as we were discussing this, like so many people will just, you know, let their employer withdraw $1,000 a month out of their paycheck and turn it over to some fiduciary that the employer's chosen. And then you just select a, you know, high growth, mid growth, long growth, depending on your age, and you set it and forget it. And you don't read your statements and you probably couldn't even understand it anyway. But then so many people, once they start making this transition and journey, it's really hard. It's hard to break out of that. And that's why they need people like you. So I just appreciate what you're building in the honey badger community and the EQRP world, because it's not just a place where people can take their money out of Wall Street. They can control their own 401k, but you help with education too, which is pretty amazing.
I think that that's one of the keys, and I appreciate you saying that, to moving away from anything that's commoditized or competitive in nature, where you create something that's deeply meaningful for the people that you're interacting with, the ones that are trading their money for the thing that you serve them with, the product, the service, whatever it is. When there really is a focus on satisfying them, it's not just, the next widget that looks like the other widget, or a trick or a marketing ploy. Like, you look at companies like Pepsi versus Apple, like you feel differently with Pepsi. You might get excited and stimulated, but with Apple, there's a feeling of being part of the Apple community, or, there's different versions of that for different things. I was in the most extreme. I think about what we do, empowering people to have control of their stuff. It's like they own themselves. I'm a big liberty minded person. I know you are too. And the first thing that we own is our body. And when we don't own our body, we have no freedom. And
Mhm.
and there can be a case that some people will make, that if you own your mind, because look, if you're in prison, like Mandela was in prison, and he owned his mind, and therefore he could still maintain his freedom. Okay, so we can argue that, but I'm not going to go there. What I'm going to say is that your body is yours, and so you have to treat your body and your money the same way. And if you were to say, okay, I'm okay with being human trafficked, go ahead and take my body and go sell me to somebody else in some foreign place and let them do what they want with me. That's what Wall Street does. That's what our system does. It says, give us your money, which is a function of your energy, which is a function of your body. Truly, it's your energy, your life force that creates these things, and we'll take it and we'll abuse it and we'll rape it and pillage it. And that's what they're doing to your money. So why would you do it to yourself? What, you're not going to do it to yourself. Why would you do it with your money? And that's what people are doing. They're literally saying, abuse me to their money. And you know, when people say money doesn't matter, I'm like, the hell it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. Just like oxygen doesn't matter until you hold yourself under the water for 15 seconds, then it's the only thing. Next time you get hungry, ask yourself, does money matter? You're damn right it matters. And so we have to start really taking a deeper responsibility for it and stop disconnecting from it because it takes time and energy. Yeah, it does. And you know, so does breathing. Like all these things take time and energy. And the question is, are you going to abdicate responsibility or are you going to own it? And I think that's the big shift in society where there's a lot of people that are shifting into victim. It's all these different movements. It's everybody's a victim.
Mm,
Like if everybody's a victim, then nobody's a victim.
yeah.
Everybody has crap happen to them. And the reality is we all get to choose what we do with it, even if we didn't cause it. Nobody caused a hurricane. Nobody caused certain things. The question is, you know, nobody caused a bombing on their house in Ukraine yesterday or today. They didn't cause that. Then you have to deal with how you process it. And what do? Do you stay there or do you move? And I think most people don't give themselves the right to make the decisions like, it really sucks here in California because they're stealing from me. I'm
Mhm.
going to move. They say, well, I'm already, you know, my family's here. Like we have to decide whether we're going to be a victim or whether we're going to be a victor based on responsibility.
Victim or a victor? I love it. I have a hard stop in 1 minute, but just one last thought on that. It's interesting too, as you know, we start thinking about Bitcoin and the digitization of money and all of that. I was thinking about gold and silver and how precious that is and scarce and limited. And then you think about the transition from real money to fiat currency to digital money to, you know, something we can't even see. And I think it's probably more important than ever that people are financially educated around this because like you were talking, everything you just said made so much sense. And the reality is as money has become more and more intangible, I think it's easier and easier to not respect it.
I agree. It is about empowering ourselves with education and taking responsibility. If we don't own it, we're already dead.
Yeah. So good, man. I look forward to doing it again next week.
It's good to see you. As always, I'm excited about doing this every week with you and seeing where we take this.
Yeah. It's fun because we don't even know. We just jump on. So it's been good.
Yeah, we doctorize some money or something.
I love it. Cheers, brother.
All right, take care. See you.